All right. Chapter 4. On Sunday morning, while church bells rang in the villages along shore, the world and its mistress returned to Gatsby's house and twinkled hilariously on his lawn. "He's a bootlegger," said the young ladies, moving somewhere between his cocktails and his flowers. "One time he killed a man who had found out that he was nephew to von Heidenberg and second cousin to the devil. Reach me a rose, honey, and pour me a last drop into that there crystal glass." Again, very cool stories about Gatsby. Once I wrote down on the empty spaces of a timetable the name of those who came to Gatsby's house that summer. It is an old timetable now, disintegrating at its folds and headed. This schedule in effect July 5, 1922. But I can still read the gray names, and they will give you a better impression than my generalities of those who accepted Gatsby's hospitality and paid him the settled tribute of knowing nothing whatever about him. Right? So he's again, painting this picture of these people who are just showing up to have a party and they don't actually know anything about him. So they're just again, parasites, just taking from other people. When did the United States outlaw alcohol? Was it during this time period?
It is during this time period.
Right.
I think it only lasted a year, and I think it was the year 1922 or 23 that it came back.
Can you look it up?
Yes.
Solid. From East Egg, then, came the Chester Beckers and the Leaches, and a man named Bunsen, who I knew at Yale, and Dr. Webster Civet, who was drowned last summer up in Maine, and the Hornbeams, and the Willie Voltaires, and a whole clan named Blackbuck, who always gathered in a corner and flipped up their noses like goats at whoever came near, and the Ismays, and the Christies, or rather Hubert Arbach and Mr. Christie's wife, and Edgar Beaver, whose hair they say turned cotton white one winter afternoon for no good reason at all. So we don't have the most flattering group of people who are at this party, right?
So it was actually 1920 to 1933.
I was about to say, I think it's more than a year. So 13 years of ban on the sale of alcohol or a ban on the consumption of alcohol. I think it's a ban on the sale of alcohol, right?
I think it was everything.
A ban on the sale and a ban on the production,
transportation, and sale,
but not consumption.
It doesn't say consumption.
Right, exactly. So that's why you can drink, you just can't make it or sell it or buy it.
Which means eventually it'll run out and you can't, I guess.
I think that was their idea. I think probably the politicians were like, let's ban alcohol. It's terrible. But I've got some really good stuff. So let's just say you can't make more of it and then we can still enjoy our good stuff while it lasts. And so that's how Gatsby's making his money. The rumor is that he's a bootlegger. Clarence Edivine was from East Egg, as I remember. He came only once in white knickerbockers, I don't know what knickerbockers are, and had a fight with a bum named Eddie in the garden. From farther out on the island came the Cheadles and the ORP Schraderers and the Stonewall Jackson Abrams of Georgia and the Fish Guards and the Ripley Snells. Snell was there 3 days before he went to the penitentiary, so drunk out on the gravel drive that Mrs. Ulysses Sweat's automobile ran over his right hand. Ooh. Penitentiary might not have meant jail. It might have meant a place you send someone who has a drinking problem to get sober.
Yeah, like rehab or something.
Yeah, it might be that. It might be jail, I guess, too, though. I'm not sure. The Danceys came too, and S.B. Whitebait, who was well over 60, and Maurice A. Flink, and the Hammerheads, and Beluga the tobacco importer, and Beluga's girls. I would also like to point out that probably what happened was Fitzgerald was making up people, and probably he was also making fun of people who he knew and he didn't like, and that he had encountered in life, and probably put them in the book as well. He was like, people will never forget you.
Yeah.
And only the worst part of you.
Names were changed.
Yeah, maybe. From West Egg came the Poles and the Mulreadys, and Cecile Roebuck, and Cecile Schoen, and Gulick, the state senator, and Newton Orchid, who controlled films par excellence, and Eck Ost, and Clyde Cohen and Don S. Schwartz, the son, and Arthur McCarty, all connected with movies in one way or another, and Catlips and Bembergs and G. Earl Muldoon, brother to that Muldoon who afterwards strangled his wife. De Fontano, the promoter, came there, and Ed Legros, James B. Rotgut Ferret, and the DeJongs and Ernest Lilly. They came to gamble, and when Ferret wandered into the garden, it meant he was cleaned out, and Associated Traction would have to fluctuate profitability next day. So that was like his company. He was like he had lost so much money that his company would have to make a bunch of money to make up for all the money he'd lost gambling. So now we've got Gatsby's house is basically a casino, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's booze and there's gambling, and people show up to do all those activities.
Speakeasy.
It's basically a speakeasy is this place.
And he purposely separates the descriptions of people from East Egg and West Egg, right?
It looks like he does that, and then I think he also breaks them up based on what they do, right? So let's say we've got the film people, right? So we've got like entertainment, and entertainment is not like Hollywood is not usually known for being an industry that has people who are devoted to the well-being of others, right? So like not great, kind of like Seven Deadly Sins idea. So that's one. We've got movies. What's this one? We've got tobacco. We've got dancing. What else is in this one? What are their jobs?
The state senator.
The senator. All right. So we've got
that was the East Egger.
Oh, was that the East Egger?
The West Egger was state senator, right?
Mm-hmm. So it'd be interesting to go back and look at all this, but we're not going to do that right now. So this video is not too long. A man named Klipspringer was there so often and so long that he became known as the Boarder. I doubt if he had any other home. Of theatrical people, there were Gus Ways and Horace O'Donovan and Lester Meyer and George Duckweed and Francis Bull. Also from New York were the Chromes and the Backesons and the Denekers and Russell Betty and the Corrigans and the Kellers and the Dwars and Scoleys and S.W. Belcher and the Smirks and the Young Quins, divorced now, and Henry L. Palmetto, who killed himself by jumping in front of a subway train in Times Square. So I think all this would have meant a lot more to us if we were alive in 1922. Benny McCann arrived always with 4 girls. They were never quite the same ones in physical person, but they were so identical one with another that it inevitably seemed they had been there before. I love it. These people have no intrinsic goal with anything that they acquire or have. So he brings these girls and they're all just the same kind of person. He's not interested in their character. He's just interested in what they look like, and they're so unoriginal that they just sound the same. Also, I've forgotten their names. Jacqueline, I think, or else Consuela or Gloria or Judy or June, and their last names were either the melodious names of flowers and months or the sterner ones of the great American capitalists whose cousins, if pressed, they would confess themselves to be. It's
so he bought these girls to their company, I would assume?
Oh, yeah.
Because the names are made up. That's what he's trying to say with the flowers and...
Oh, that makes sense. So these are escorts?
Yeah.
Probably.
They're cousins with famous people or blah, blah, blah. Just make up some backstory.
Yeah. Or they might be. I don't know. In addition to all these, I can remember that Faustina O'Brien came there at least once, and the Badager girls and young Brewer, who had his nose shot off in the war, and Mr. Allbuckersberger and Miss Hagg, his fiancée, Hagg, and Ardita Fitzpeter and Mr. P. Jewett, once head of the American Legion, and Miss Claudia Hip with a man reputed to be her chauffeur, and a prince of something whom we called Duke, and whose name, if I ever knew it, I have forgotten. All these people came to Gatsby's house in the summer. At 9 o'clock one morning, late in July, Gatsby's gorgeous car lurched up the rocky drive to my door and gave out a burst of melody from its 3-noted horn. It was the first time he had called on me, though I had gone to 2 of his parties, mounted in his hydroplane, and, at his urgent invitation, made frequent use of his beach. Good morning, old sport. You're having lunch with me today, and I thought we'd ride up together. He was balancing himself on the dashboard of his car with that resourcefulness of movement that is so peculiarly American, That comes, I suppose, with the absence of lifting work or rigid sitting in youth, and even more with the formless grace of our nervous, sporadic games. This quality was continually breaking through his um, punctilious, punctilious. I don't know what that means. I guess like being punctual manner in the shape of restlessness. He was never quite still. There was always a tapping foot somewhere or the impatient opening and closing of a hand. So he's got this like he almost describes this as like this very American trait of like never moving, never being calm, never being content with what you have, always being restless, always ready to do something. Did you look it up?
Attention to detail.
Attention to detail. Okay. What did I
Correct
say?
behavior.
Punctual. Punctual is
Yeah.
kind of an attention to detail in a way, but slightly different. He saw me looking with admiration at his car. Guess what color his car is? It's pretty, isn't it, old sport? He jumped off to give me a better view. Haven't you ever seen it before? I'd seen it. Everybody had seen it. It was a rich cream color, bright with nickel, swollen here and there in its monstrous length, with triumphant hat boxes and supper boxes and tool boxes, and terraced with a labyrinth of windshields that mirrored a dozen suns. Sitting down beside or behind many layers of glass in a sort of green leather conservatory, we started to town. And so we've got it described as like a dozen suns. I had talked with him perhaps half a dozen times in the past month and found to my disappointment he had little to say. Side note, never. You should always hope that no one ever thinks that you are a disappointing person because you have little to say. So my first impression that he was a person of some undefined consequence had gradually faded, and he had become simply the proprietor of an elaborate roadhouse next door. And so now we've got Nick has become much less, not infatuated, but much less interested in Gatsby now. Now he's realized, he's not someone who's very interesting and clever and maybe someone who would be like a good friend. He's like, he's just like this guy who runs like a casino next door.
Yeah, he's like everyone else's.
Mm-hmm.
Allure and no substance.
Exactly, very much. Allure and no substance. I like that. And then came that disconcerting ride. We hadn't reached West Egg Village before Gatsby began leaving his elegant sentences unfinished and slapping himself indecisively on the knee of his caramel-colored suit. Look here, old sport, he broke out surprisingly. What's your opinion of me, anyhow? A little overwhelmed, I began the generalized evasions which that question deserves. But he's like, how can I not answer your question? Well, I'm going to tell you something about my life, he interrupted. I don't want you to get the wrong idea of me from all these stories you hear. So he was aware of the bizarre accusations that flavored conversations in his halls. How much do you want to bet that he told people to like spread this story or that story or whatever?
Or he at least allows it.
Absolutely.
It's important for his legend.
Absolutely. I'll tell you God's truth. His right hand suddenly ordered divine retribution to stand by. I am the son of some wealthy people in the Midwest, all dead now. I was brought up in America but educated at Oxford because all my ancestors had been educated there for many years. It is a family tradition. He looked at me sideways, and I knew why Jordan Baker had believed he was lying. He hurried the phrase educated at Oxford, or swallowed it, or choked on it, as though it had bothered him before. And with this doubt, his whole statement fell to pieces, and I wondered if there wasn't something a little sinister about him after all. What part of the Midwest? I inquired casually. San Francisco. I see. Very much not the Midwest. My family all died, and I came into a good deal of money. His voice was solemn, as if the memory of that sudden extinction of a clan still haunted him. For a moment I suspected he was pulling my leg, but a glance at him convinced me otherwise. After I lived like a young Raja in all the capitals of Europe, Paris, Venice, Rome, collecting jewels, chiefly rubies, hunting big game, painting a little, things for myself only, and trying to forget something very sad that had happened to me long ago. Very it's like the most humble brag ever.
Yeah.
With an effort I managed to restrain my incredulous laughter. The very phrases were worn so threadbare that they evoked no image except that of a turbaned character leaking sawdust at every pore as he pursued a tiger through the Bois de Boulogne. Bois de Boulogne. Also note that he's again doing the thing where it's like I don't have anything of substance. I'm just going to like copy stories or the ideas of what rich people do. And I'm just going to pass it off as my own. I'm like not original in any way.
He's flexing on him.
Yep. Then came the war, old sport. It was a great relief, and I tried very hard to die but I seemed to bear an enchanted life. I accepted a commission as first lieutenant when it began. In the Aragon forest, I took 2 machine gun detachments so far forward that there was a half-mile gap on either side of us where the infantry couldn't advance. We stayed there 2 days and 2 nights, 130 men with 16 Lewis guns, and when the infantry came up at last, they found the insignia of 3 German divisions among the piles of dead. I was promoted to be a major, and every Allied government gave me a decoration, even Montenegro. Little Montenegro, down on the Adriatic Sea. Little Montenegro. He lifted up the word and nodded at them with his smile. The smile comprehended Montenegro's troubled history and sympathized with the brave struggles of the Montenegrin people. It appreciated fully the chain of national circumstances which had elicited this tribute from Montenegro's warm little heart. My incredulity was submerged in fascination now. It was like skimming hastily through a dozen magazines. Does his war story seem real?
No, so I was gonna say that it's obviously fake if you know about um, war. Like he didn't hold off the line a half mile on every side. You're not gonna do that. That's not possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Your weapons can't even shoot that far, so it's ridiculous to say that no one could get within a half mile of you.
Right.
But people in the military do this, so I think that I don't know. Maybe it happens later in the chapter, but Nick wouldn't comment on it because it's just like if some guy came and told me some crazy story, I'm not gonna be like, "You're an idiot." Like she's like, "Oh, cool," and I just know that it's fake.
Yeah.
Unless he's trying to like pass this off to this entire crowd, and I'd be like, "Come on."
Right. Yeah. He's like, I'm not gonna interrupt your fantasy right now because it's not harming anyone.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that that's what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and he kind of describes that right down here. He says it was like skimming hastily through a dozen magazines. Right. He's just like, this is just like pulp fiction. Right.
Yeah.
Like a comic book. He reached in his pocket and a piece of metal slung on a ribbon fell into my palm. That's the one from Montenegro. To my astonishment, the thing had an authentic look. Orrery di Danilo ran the circular legend, Montenegro, Nicholas Rex. Turn it. Major J. Gatsby, I read, for valor extraordinary. Here's another thing I always carry. So, what would you say if you ran into someone who was in the army and he was carrying around his military awards?
So, I mean, this is to nowadays, no, like, get over it, bro. Some people put stickers like on the back of their vehicles of like the awards that they won, and we even make fun of that.
Mm-hmm.
If you just have like the campaign or whatever, that's cool. But some people put like, Army Combat Action Badge,
mm-hmm.
Or Army Achievement Medal, and people are just like, no, that's that's dumb. But obviously he's carrying it around because he's lying and he has like facts and evidence, right? Like, oh, here's my evidence that I'm not lying.
Yeah, very much so. Here's another thing I always carry around, a souvenir of Oxford days. It was taken in Trinity Quad. The man on my left is now the Earl of Dorchester. It was a photograph of a half dozen young men in blazers loafing in an archway through which were visible a host of spires. There was Gatsby, looking a little, not much, younger, with a cricket bat in his hand. Then it was all true. I saw the skins of tigers flaming in his palace on the Grand Canal. I saw him opening a chest of rubies to ease, with their crimson-lighted depths, the 9 of his broken heart. I'm going to make a big request of you today. So hold on. Is Nick buying all of this?
So it looks like he was doubting it, and then because he shows him all this stuff,
yeah,
he's like, then it was all true. Oh, he must not have been lying. Uh-huh. That's what he's saying. Yeah.
Always question convenient evidence.
Yeah.
I'm going to make a big request of you today, he said, pocketing his souvenir with satisfaction. So I thought you ought to know something about me. I didn't want you to think I was just some nobody. You see, I usually find myself among strangers because I drift here and there, trying to forget the sad thing that happened to me. Oh, sad, sad Gatsby. He hesitated. You'll hear about it this afternoon. At lunch? No, this afternoon. I happened to find out that you're taking Miss Baker to tea. Do you mean you're in love with Miss Baker? I love Nick's first. He's like, oh man, if you're in love with Miss Baker, I'm screwed. There's no way I can get her.
Clear. Do you mean you're in love?
Yeah. So just wondering, are you you have a thing for Miss Baker? No, old sport, I'm not. But Miss Baker has kindly consented to speak to you about this matter. I hadn't the faintest idea what this matter was, but I was more annoyed than interested. I hadn't asked Jordan to tea in order to discuss Mr. J. Gatsby. I am sure the request would be something utterly fantastic, and for a moment I was sorry I'd ever set foot upon his overpopulated lawn. So to be clear, Gatsby's like, hey, we're going to go for a drive and have some lunch. Here's who I am. Here's my story. I'm going to make a request of you. Oh, what's the request? Nick asks. I'm not going to tell you right now. You'll find out later. Mm-hmm. So he could just tell him the request right now, but that's not the way Gatsby rules.
I just thought of, like in the really old days when you would go somewhere new and someone would write you a letter
mm-hmm.
and they put their seal on it. Ben Franklin did that when he came to America or went to France?
When he went to France, probably.
Someone like they write you a letter vouching for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's kind of like he has no one to vouch for him, so this is what he's doing. Like, here's my medals and my stuff. And
mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so. He has no one, because no one really knows who he is.
Yeah.
He's all alone. He wouldn't say another word. His correctness grew on me as we neared the city. We passed Port Roosevelt, where there was a glimpse of red-belted ocean-going ships, and sped along a cobbled slum lined with the dark, undeserted saloons of the faded, gilt 1900s. Then the Valley of Ashes opened out on both sides of us, and I had a glimpse of Mrs. Wilson straining at the garage pump with panting vitality as we went by. With fenders spread like wings, we scattered light through half Astoria. Only half, for as we twisted along among the pillars of the elevated, I heard the familiar jug spat of a motorcycle, and a fantastic policeman rode alongside. All right, old sport, called Gatsby. We slowed down. Taking a white card from his wallet, he waved it before the man's eyes. Right you are, agreed the policeman, tipping his cap. Know you next time, Mr. Gatsby. Excuse me. What was that? I inquired. The picture of Oxford? I was able to do the commissioner a favor once, and he sends me a Christmas card every year. So if you didn't catch that, they got pulled over for speeding, and then Gatsby pulls out this white card from his wallet, like a credit card, and shows it to the policeman. The policeman's like, "Oh, you're one of the people. You've got the pass. You've got the get out of jail free pass. Got it. All right. So we've got his opportunity, right? Gatsby has, or his privilege. Gatsby is very privileged. Over the Great Bridge was the sunlight through. Also, though, I do love that he did a favor once for the commissioner. Very much like, yes, I'm very connected.
Yeah.
Over the Great Bridge, with the sunlight through the girders making a constant flicker upon the moving cars, with the city rising up across the river in white heaps and sugar lumps, all built with a wish out of non-olfactory money. The city, seen from the Queensboro Bridge, is always the city seen for the first time, in its first wild promise of all the mystery and the beauty in the world. A dead man passed us in a hearse heaped with blooms, and followed by 2 carriages with drawn blinds, and by more cheerful carriages for friends. The friends looked out at us with the tragic eyes and short upper lips of southern Eastern Europe, and I was glad that the sight of Gatsby's splendid car was included in their somber holiday. It's such a self-centered and important idea. Oh well, at least Gatsby's car cheered up their day. As we crossed the Blackwell's Island, a limousine passed us, driven by a white chauffeur, in which sat 3 moodish Negroes, 2 bucks, and a girl. 2 bucks.
Young bulls.
Oh.
Young men.
All right, solid. So we're describing people as horses.
Typical.
No,
I think that's like a.
is that okay?
That's like a slang.
Oh, okay. Back in the 20s.
Unfortunately, it comes right after the other word, but people say young buck, Oh, that makes sense. Young buck, young bull.
And Negroes was a common term back in the 20s for Black Americans. I laughed aloud as the yolks of their eyeballs rolled toward us in haughty rivalry. Anything can happen now that we've slid over this bridge, I thought. Anything at all. Even Gatsby could happen without any particular wonder. Roaring noon. In a well-fanned 42nd Street cellar, I met Gatsby for lunch. Blinking away the brightness of the street outside, my eyes picked him out obscurely in the anteroom, talking to another man. Mr. Carroway, this is my friend, Mr. Wolfsheim. A small, flat-nosed Jew raised his large head and regarded me with two fine growths of hair, which luxuriated in either nostril. After a moment, I discovered his tiny eyes in the half-darkness. So I took one look at him, said Mr. Wolfsheim, shaking my hand earnestly. And what do you think I did? What? I inquired politely. But evidently, he was not addressing me, for he dropped my hand and covered Gatsby with his expressive nose. I handed the money to Catspaw, and I said, "All right, Catspaw, don't pay him a penny till he shuts his mouth." He shut it then and there. Gatsby took an arm of each of us and moved forward into the restaurant, whereupon Mr. Wolfsheim swallowed a new sentence he was starting and lapsed into a somnambulatory abstraction. What is that? Highballs, asked the head waiter. That is a nice restaurant here, said Mr. Wolfsheim, looking at the Presbyterian nymphs on the ceiling, but I like across the street better. Yes, highballs, agreed Gatsby, and then to Mr. Wolfsheim, it's too hot over there. Hot and small, yes, said Mr. Wolfsheim, but full of memories. What is it?
Somnambulatory is done while sleepwalking.
Interesting. Lapsed into a... Okay, so like this guy's just like moving through life without thinking again, right?
Mm-hmm.
These people who are just existing. But full of memories. What place is that, I asked. The old metropole. The old metropole. The old metropole brewed Mr. Wolfsheim gloomily. Filled with faces dead and gone. Filled with friends gone now forever. I can't forget so long as I live the night they shot Rosie Rosenthal there. It was 6 of us at the table, and Rosie had eat and drunk a lot all evening. When it was almost morning, the waiter came up to him with a funny look and says somebody wants to speak to him outside. All right, says Rosie, and begins to get up and pulled him down, and I pulled him down in his chair. Let the bastards come in here if they want to, Rosie, and don't you, so help me, move outside this room. It was 4 o'clock in the morning then, and if we'd raised the blinds, we'd have seen daylight. Did he go? I asked innocently. Sure he went. Mr. Wolfsheim's nose flashed at me indignantly. He turned around in the door and says, "Don't let the waiter take away my coffee." Then he went out on the sidewalk, and they shot him 3 times in his full belly and drove away. 4 of them were electrocuted, I said, remembering. 5 with Becker. His nostrils turned to me in an interested way. I understand you're looking for a business connection? Oh, connection.
I think that
business connection.
Yeah.
Is that a typo? Maybe.
Yeah, I was going to look it up. But...
Or it's just his the way he speaks. And so the significance of the story, right, is that it tells us that this guy is probably in the mob, right, or involved in organized crime, right? Because like the one story this guy tells is the story that they're at a restaurant until 4 o'clock in the morning, and someone gets shot in front of the restaurant, right? That's very much like just out of a gangster movie. Does it mean anything? Probably not.
It does, actually. Oh. It says the I dialect spelling of connection. I don't know what I dialect is, though.
Wonder if it's Jewish? Back in the 20s?
Wolfsheim, yeah.
Possibly. The juxtaposition of these 2 remarks was startling. Juxtaposition of these 2 remarks. Oh, yeah, right? Nick's like, whoa, that was a turn, right? Because the guy's like, yes, this is... this guy who's very close to me was murdered at this restaurant back in the day. So I hear you want some business connections, Nick. And Nick's like, whoa. Gatsby answered for me. Oh, no, he exclaimed. This isn't the man. No? Mr. Wolfsheim seemed disappointed. This is just a friend. I told you we'd talk about that some other time. I beg your pardon, Mr. Wolfsheim, said Mr. Wolfsheim.
I think the story was to impress Nick. Like, that's his medals and stories that he's telling him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, so he tells him, like, I know about this murder. He's like, so are you looking for a connection? So I think that they're comparing those 2 things. Like, everyone in this world they have to introduce themselves somehow because they don't have someone to do it for him.
Yeah, they don't have credibility or like a solid reputation.
Yeah, so he's like, here's my street cred.
My street cred is that I'm connected to all these people who are in organized crime, so you can trust me. A succulent hash arrived, and Mr. Wolfsheim, forgetting the more sentimental atmosphere of the old metropole, began to eat with ferocious delicacy. His eyes, meanwhile, roved very slowly all around the room. He completed the arc by turning to inspect the people directly behind. I think that, except for my presence, he would have taken one short glance beneath our own table. And what would he be looking underneath the table for? Presumably a gun,
Yeah.
right? Who shot first? Was it Han? Or who's the other guy in Star Wars? Have you seen that? In the first one, which is Episode 4, they're in the bar, and the first time we see Han Solo, he's in a disagreement with another person, and they both shoot each other.
I didn't know that was there's like a thing online about that.
Oh yeah, there's like a whole debate that I don't care about. Look here, old sport, said Gatsby, leaning toward me. I'm afraid I made you a little angry this morning in the car. There was the smile again, but this time I held out against it. I don't like mysteries, I answered. I don't understand why you won't come out frankly and tell me what you want. Why has it all got to come through Miss Baker? Oh, it's nothing underhanded, he assured me. Miss Baker is a great sportswoman, and she'd never do anything that wasn't all right, except that we know that she would. Suddenly he looked at his watch, jumped up, and hurried from the room, leaving me with Mr. Wolfsheim at the table. He has a telephone, said Mr. Wolfsheim, following him with his eyes. Fine fellow, isn't he? Handsome to look at, and a perfect gentleman. Yes. He's an Oxford man. Oh, he went to Oxford College in England. You know Oxford College? I've heard of it. It's one of the most famous colleges in the world. Have you known Gatsby for a long time? I inquired. Several years, he answered in a gratified way. I made the pleasure of his acquaintance just after the war, but I knew I had discovered a man of fine breeding after I talked with him an hour. I said to myself, there's the kind of man you'd like to take home and introduce to your mother and sister. He paused. I see you're looking at my cuff bottoms. I hadn't been looking at them, but I did now. They were composed of oddly familiar pieces of ivory. Finest specimen of human molars, he informed me. Well, I inspected them. That's a very interesting idea. Yeah, he flipped his sleeves up under his coat. Yeah, Gatsby's very careful about women. This guy's transitions are amazing.
Yeah.
So let's just take a moment to absorb that. He has human teeth on his cuff bottoms of his shirt, presumably, right?
Yeah.
So the cuffs are if you have a shirt for like a tuxedo, usually you need to put in the buttons. So the part that's holding the sleeves of his shirt by his wrists closed are held together with human teeth. And then the finest specimens. God. And then note that he also said that he was very impressed with Gatsby the first time that he met him, and that he thinks that he's just like a stand-up guy and a great person. Mm-hmm. And then contrasted with Nick, who at least realized for a while that Gatsby was probably not like someone he should be impressed by.
Yeah.
So maybe this guy's kind of just like following.
He's building him up, yeah, because
mm-hmm.
now he knows, it's not a crime connection, a business connection.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like, okay, so I need something else from this guy, which means that he's probably you want the clean version of your legend.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, right. He's painting him to be like, he's like, oh yes, you're not the criminal, so we'll just go with the Gatsby's a good man story.
Because potentially he's a police commissioner or something,
mm-hmm.
and he wants him. He's not going to connect with a guy that came out of nowhere and made his money. He wants someone that's,
that's a gentleman.
Yeah,
yes.
Gentleman. Yeah,
exactly. So where were we at? At the teeth, the human teeth he has. Yeah, Gatsby's very careful about women. He would never so much as look at a friend's wife. When the subject of his instinctive trust returned to the table and sat down, Mr. Wolfsheim drank his coffee with a jerk and got to his feet. I've enjoyed my lunch, he said, and I'm going to run off from you two young men before I outstay my welcome. Don't hurry, Meyer, said Gatsby without enthusiasm. Mr. Wolfsheim raised his hand in a sort of benediction. You're very polite, but I belong to another generation, he announced solemnly. You sit here and discuss your sports and your young ladies and your... He supplied an imaginary noun with another wave of his hand. As for me, I am 50 years old, and I won't impose myself on you any longer. I love the idea. So he just like didn't come up with anything. He just like waved his hand, and
He's
he was
just
like,
trying to get out of there. Like my time's up.
"Yeah, this thing." As he shook hands and as he shook hands and turned away, his tragic nose was trembling. I wondered if I had said something to offend him. He became very sentimental. He becomes very sentimental sometimes, explained Gatsby. This is one of his sentimental days. He's quite a character around New York, a denizen of Broadway. Who is he, anyhow? An actor? No. A dentist? Meyer Wolfsheim?
A dentist because he has the teeth.
Meyer Wolfsheim? No, he's a gambler. Gatsby hesitated, then added coolly, he's the man who fixed the World Series back in 1919. Fixed the World Series? I repeated. The idea staggered me. I remembered, of course, that the World Series had been fixed in 1919, but if I had thought of it all, I would have thought of it as a thing that merely happened, the end of some inevitable chain. It never occurred to me that one man could start to play with the faith of 50 million people, with the single mindedness of a burglar blowing a safe. How did he happen to do that? I asked after a minute. He just saw the opportunity. Why isn't he in jail? They can't get him, old sport. He's a smart man. I insisted on paying the check as the waiter brought my change. I caught sight of Tom Buchanan across the crowded room. Come along with me for a minute, I said. I've got to say hello to someone. And so we've got, again, Gatsby just like telling this story that has no evidence behind it. That's just like very much like about reputation, right? That this guy was the one who fixed the World Series in 1919.
Now he's the one with the rumors.
This world of no one is who they are, and everyone is all about the stories that people tell about them, and not about like who they really are deep down inside. And this is gonna be awkward, meeting Tom. When he saw us, Tom jumped up and took half a dozen steps in our direction. Where have you been? He demanded eagerly. Daisy's furious because you haven't called up. This is Mr. Gatsby, Mr. Buchanan. They shook hands briefly, and a strained, unfamiliar look of embarrassment came over Gatsby's face. How have you been, anyhow? Demanded Tom of me. How do you happen to come up this far to eat? Notice that Tom is not at all interested in Gatsby, even though Gatsby has this great reputation and holds all these parties. Like to Tom, he's like, I'm the real rich of America, and you're not.
You're just some guy.
Yep. I've been having lunch with Mr. Gatsby. I turned toward Mr. Gatsby, but he was no longer there. One October day in 1917, said Jordan Baker that afternoon, sitting up very straight on a straight chair in the tea garden at the plaza. And so now Gatsby left. And why did Gatsby leave? Because of Tom.
He knows who Tom is.
He knows who Tom is, very much so. I was walking along from one place to another, half on the sidewalks and half on the lawns. I was happier on the lawns because I had on shoes from England with rubber knobs on the soles that bit into the soft ground. I had on a new plaid skirt, also that blew a little in the wind, and whenever this happened, the red, white, and blue banners in front of all of the houses stretched out stiff and said, "Tut, tut, tut," in a disapproving way. The largest of the banners and the largest of the lawns belonged to Daisy Fay's house. She was just 18, 2 years older than me, and by far the most popular of all the young girls in Louisville. She dressed in white and had a little white roadster, and all day long the telephone rang in her house, and excited young officers from Camp Taylor demanded the privilege of monopolizing her that night, anyways, for an hour. When I came opposite her house that morning, her white roadster was beside the curb, and she was sitting in it with a lieutenant I had never seen before. They were so engrossed in each other that she didn't see me until I was 5 feet away. "Hello, Jordan," she called unexpectedly. "Please come here." I was flattered that she wanted to speak to me because of all the older girls I admired her the most. She asked me if I was going to the Red Cross and make bandages. I was. Notice that what did Jordan Baker admire about Daisy? She admired that she was rich, had a big house, had a car, and had all of these men, all these soldiers fawning off after her.
Yeah.
Were you going to the Red Cross to make bandages? I was. Well then, would I tell them that she couldn't come that day? The officer looked at Daisy while she was speaking, in a way that every young girl wants to be looked at sometime. And because it seemed romantic to me, I have remembered the incident ever since. His name was Jay Gatsby, and I didn't lay eyes on him again for over 4 years. Even after I'd met him on Long Island, I didn't realize it was the same man. Also note that Daisy has a choice between making bandages and helping people, or like going on a date, and she's like, "No, I'm gonna go on the date. I'm not gonna help people." That was 1917. By the next year, I had a few beaux myself. Beaux, booze,
Bow.
beaux.
Yeah, it's like a
Yeah,
bow.
I had a few beaux myself, and I began to play in tournaments. So I didn't see Daisy very often. She went with a slightly older crowd, when she went with anyone at all. Wild rumors were circulating about her. How her mother had found her packing her bags one winter night to go to New York and say goodbye to a soldier who was going overseas. She was effectively prevented. She was effectually prevented, but she wasn't on speaking terms with her family for several weeks. After that, she didn't play around with soldiers anymore, but only with a few flat-footed, short-sighted young men in town who couldn't get into the army at all. Interesting. By the next autumn, she was gay again, gay as ever. She had a debut after the armistice, and in February she was presumably engaged to a man from New Orleans. In June, she married Tom Buchanan of Chicago, with more pomp and circumstance than Louisville ever knew before. He came down with 100 people in 4 private cars and hired a whole floor of the Seelbach Hotel, and the day before the wedding gave her a string of pearls valued at $350,000 in 1917.
Maybe
That's,
18.
hmm?
Was this by next autumn?
Yeah,
Might be the next
1918.
year?
Yeah. Inflation not that strong, though.
But yeah, it doesn't matter.
No, I think we've got this idea of Tom just spending money, right?
But also, so she was engaged in February and then got married to someone else in June.
Right, yeah. So she was engaged to someone in New Orleans, and then Tom showed up, I guess. And
Yeah.
so she married Tom. It's a very interesting, right? So there's no conviction behind these relationships, basically, after Gatsby.
Yeah, she's just looking for a man.
So, like with Gatsby, she was trying to leave her life to go to him.
Mhm.
Then after that, she's just taking what comes to her, right?
Yeah, or is it
She's taking what's
sort
given
of
to her.
arranged with Tom? And they're like, no, you're not marrying this guy from New Orleans.
Maybe.
I don't know if that ever comes up. It's been a while since I read it.
I don't think it's talked about. We'll see. I don't know. I was bridesmaid. I came into her room half an hour before the bridal dinner and found her lying on her bed, as lovely as June night in her flowered dress and as drunk as a monkey. She had a bottle of Sauterne. I'm gonna guess it's a southern booze in one hand and a letter in the other. "Congratulate me," she muttered. "Never had a drink before, but oh, how I do enjoy it. What's the matter, Daisy?" I was scared, I can tell you. I'd never seen a girl like that before. So like she's like on the bed with this letter in one hand and a bottle of hard alcohol in the other, and just like crying, right? Which is not how you want to find your friend the night before she's gonna get married. What is it?
French sweet wine.
French sweet wine. Oh, okay. Here, dearies. She groped around in a wastebasket she had with her on her bed and pulled out the string of pearls. "Take 'em downstairs and give 'em back to whoever they belong to. Tell 'em all Daisy's changed her mind. Say Daisy's changed her mind." She threw away all of her stuff, right? So we've got that Daisy has like some like character down in there, right? She began to cry. She cried and cried. I rushed out and found her mother's maid, and we locked the door and got her into a cold bath. She wouldn't let go of the letter. She took it into the tub with her and squeezed it up into a wet ball, and only let me leave it in the soap dish when she saw that it was coming to pieces like snow. And what was coming to pieces like snow? The letter.
Mm-hmm.
So like her dreams and goals were just like falling apart.
This is, I guess, bringing back why she said she wants her daughter to grow up to be a young, stupid girl.
To be a fool.
Fool.
Yeah.
A pretty fool, right?
Yeah. But that also might have to do with like if you're a fool, you don't know when someone's hurting you.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, so she won't get hurt.
Yeah. But this one's not her being a fool.
Oh,
really,
that's
right?
true. Yeah.
This is her like confronting the fact that she loves Gatsby, but she's gonna marry Tom, who is all show and no substance. Tom's the Fast and the Furious.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, who plays Tom in the movie? What's his face? He's in Inception and Tom Hardy, right?
Tom Hardy?
Isn't Tom Hardy Tom Buchanan?
I don't know. I was gonna watch it, but then I haven't yet. All I know is Tobey Maguire is the perfect Nick Carraway.
Tobey Maguire is hands down the perfect Nick Carraway.
But if it is Tom Hardy, that's a good choice.
I think it is Tom Hardy.
Bane is Tom.
I think. Hold on, we need to find this out. Maybe not. Maybe it's not Tom Hardy.
Yeah, actually, I'll look that.
It's not Tom Hardy. All right, we'll see. All right, but she didn't say another word. We gave her spirits of ammonia and put ice on her forehead and hooked her back into her dress. And half an hour later, when we walked out of the room, the pearls were around her neck and the incident was over. Next day at 5 o'clock, she married Tom Buchanan without so much as a shiver and started off on a 3-month trip to the South Seas. I saw them in Santa Barbara when they came back, and I thought I'd never seen a girl so mad about her husband. If he left the room for a minute, she'd look around uneasily and say, "Where'd Tom go?" and wear the most abstracted expression until she saw him coming in the door. She used to sit on the sand with his head in her lap by the hour, rubbing her fingers over his eyes and looking at him with unfathomable delight. It was touching to see them together. It made you laugh in a hushed, fascinated way. That was in August. A week after I left Santa Barbara, Tom ran into a wagon on the Ventura Road one night and ripped a front wheel off his car. The girl who was with him got into the papers too because her arm was broken. She was one of the chambermaids in the Santa Barbara hotel. And now we've got why she wants her daughter to be a fool, because even back then, right after they were married, Tom was already fooling around with other girls. Was it Tom Hardy?
Did she? No, it was not. It was Joel Edgerton.
Oh, okay.
I don't know who that is.
So I was very wrong.
In Star Wars.
It was not Bane, alas.
He's in a lot of big movies, but I don't know any characters.
Yeah.
But
also, it's interesting that car, it's the same thing as the other car that was in front of Gatsby's house, right? That it had its wheel taken off. And was it run into a ditch?
Is that? You think that's on purpose?
Yeah, that's it. I don't know. And there's only so many ways a car can break down, I guess. The next April, Daisy had her little girl, and they went to France for a year. I saw them one spring in Cannes, and later in Deauville, and then they came back to Chicago to settle down. Daisy was popular in Chicago, as you know. They moved with a fast crowd, all of them young and rich and wild, but she came out with an absolutely perfect reputation, perhaps because she doesn't drink. It's a great advantage not to drink among hard-drinking people. You can hold your tongue, and, moreover, you can time any little irregularity of your own so that everybody else is so blind they don't see or care. Perhaps Daisy never went in for an amour at all, and yet there's something in that voice of hers. So it's interesting that she doesn't drink, apart from that time that she got super drunk the night before her wedding. And then Gatsby doesn't drink either. They're both like isolated in that way. I thought Daisy was drinking at the party, or in chapter 1. Her and Tom, maybe not.
I don't remember.
No. And then Tom clearly drinks all the time because he keeps getting in like drunk driving accidents and like hitting people and breaking their arms, or breaking their noses.
Yeah.
Well, about 6 weeks ago, she heard the name Gatsby for the first time in years. It was when I asked you, do you remember, if you knew Gatsby in West Egg? After you had gone home, she came into my room and woke me up and said, "What Gatsby?" And when I described him, I was half asleep. She, in the strangest voice, that it must be the man she used to know. It wasn't until then that I had connected that Gatsby with the officer in her white car. Again, white car, right? It's like in her time of innocence, before she was like corrupted by American society. And notice how damaging American society is on Daisy. It's not like violent. It's like grating, right? It's like over time it just like grates her down like cheese on a grater. It's just like every year it's just like there's less and less and less of her. When Jordan Baker had finished telling all this, we had left the plaza for half an hour and were driving in a Victoria through Central Park. The sun had gone down behind the tall apartments of the movie stars in the West 50s, and the clear voices of girls, already gathered like crickets on the grass, rose through the hot twilight. "I'm the Sheik of Araby. Your love belongs to me. At night, when you are asleep, into your tent I'll creep." It was a strange coincidence, I said. But it wasn't a coincidence at all. Why not? Gatsby bought that house so Daisy would be just across the bay. Then it had not been merely the stars to which he had aspired on that June night. He came alive to me, delivered suddenly from the womb of his purposeless splendor. He wants to know, continued Jordan, if you'll invite Daisy to your house some afternoon and let him come over. The modesty, that's, hold on. That's like the most high school thing ever.
Yeah.
Right? That's like you asking, it's like you asking your friend, like, hey, find out if she likes me. And then I'm going to come over when you guys are hanging out.
Yeah.
Right? Instead of Gatsby being like forward about it.
It's funny too because he asked Jordan to set this up.
Right.
And she's like, wait, you know what? I know her cousin.
Mm-hmm.
So then he's like, oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then instead of them just saying something about it, it's like, hey, I'm just going to show up, you know.
Yeah, it's very backhanded. It's very dishonest.
Yeah.
Right?
But very high school. Like, that's what they do. Like, you invite her over, and I'll come over.
Mm-hmm. Also notice that what makes Gatsby interesting to Nick, and what sets him apart from the other people who are kind of like suffering, or the other people who are all the negatives of the American dream and American society, is that all of those people are purposeless. And here, what makes Nick interested in Gatsby again is that he has a purpose, and that all of the stuff he's been seeing and assuming has been waste has actually been all part of this purpose to try and win Daisy back. And so all of a sudden he's like, oh wow, this is kind of like a Nick's like oh, this is kind of like this is a beautiful thing, right? Mm-hmm. He's like, this is like this has come alive to me, this idea. He compares it to a womb, right? This is very much like the creation of something.
Yeah, I think that's going back to chapter 3. Everything was like waste at the party, right? It was all wasted, and he uses the word purposeless splendor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then that was actually in my notes too, from the other chapter, but kind of how he's lonely, like nothing's going on around him.
Yep.
And then now there's finally like, oh, here's a real story,
mm-hmm.
besides someone just like, who cares about your conversations, and girls are crying and guys are cheating on their wives and
mm-hmm.
getting in wrecks and cars, and just like, who cares,
Like, so there's purpose here, as opposed to at the party there was just purposelessness, which mm-hmm. made him feel like extra alone.
So now it's actually connecting with
mm-hmm.
his environment,
because there's a meaning to things.
Yes.
Yeah. The modesty of the modesty of the demand shook me. He had waited 5 years and bought a mansion where he dispensed starlight to casual moths so that he could come over some afternoon to a stranger's garden. It is quite funny, right? Did I have to know all this before he could ask such a little thing? He's afraid. This is Jordan talking. He's afraid. He's waited so long. He thought you might be offended. See, he's a regular tough underneath it all. Something worried me. Why didn't he ask you to arrange a meeting? He wants her to see his house, she explained, and your house is right next door. Oh. I think he half expected her to wander into one of his parties some night, went on Jordan. But she never did. Then he began asking people casually if they knew her, and I was the first one he found. It was that night he sent for me at his dance, and you should have heard the elaborate way he worked up to it. Of course, I immediately suggested a luncheon in New York, and I thought he'd go mad. I don't want to do anything out of the way, he kept saying. I want to see her right next door. When I said you were a particular friend of Tom's, he started to abandon the whole idea. He doesn't know very much about Tom, though he says he's read a Chicago paper for years just on the chance of catching a glimpse of Daisy's name. So we've got this is like his obsession and his dream is getting Daisy. That is his like he's like, it's very much metaphorical of people's hopes and dreams is what he wants here.
A couple of things about that. Like, he provided sunlight for the moths, just to meet Daisy, and he reads the newspaper just to see her name in it, in case, wife of Tom Buchanan, Daisy, that's all he's looking for. Like, that's I don't know what they call that, but
I feel like part of it it feels like there's something to do with saying that you've got all of these resources and you've spent all this money to do this thing. right? It's kind of like, again, it's like waste, right?
Yeah.
Like there's much better ways that he could have spent all of this money and consumed all of the fruit, right, in different ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
But instead, he chooses to do it in a very indirect, very wasteful, very destructive way.
Right.
It was dark now as we dipped under a little bridge. I put my arm around Jordan's golden shoulder and drew her toward me. Also notice that Jordan is always described as golden or darker or tan, whereas no other character is described this way. And I don't know why it's like that. Some people are like, oh, it's something racial, and I'm not sure if it's something racial. I just don't know. But it's just interesting to note. Oh, go Nick, by the way. I put my arm around Jordan's golden shoulder and drew her towards me and asked her to dinner. Suddenly, I wasn't thinking of Daisy and Gatsby anymore, but of this clean, hard, limited person who dealt in universal skepticism and who leaned back jauntily just within the circle of my arm. A phrase began to beat in my ears with a sort of heady excitement. There are only the pursued, the pursuing, the busy, and the tired. And Daisy ought to have something in her life, murmured Jordan to me. Does she want to see Gatsby? Also, Daisy ought to have something in her life, right? So she's like, again, we've got this idea of the American society and the American dream is so dead that the person who is rich does not have a job and has not worked hard for it, and it has nothing in her life. She's surrounded by jewels and riches and privilege, and she is empty.
Money isn't everything.
Yeah. Does money can't make you happy, but it can help.
Yeah.
Right? Does she want to see Gatsby? She's not to know about it. Gatsby doesn't want her to know. You were just supposed to invite her to tea. We passed a barrier of dark trees, and then the facade of 59th Street. A block of delicate pale light beamed down into the park. Unlike Gatsby and Tom Buchanan, I had no girl whose disembodied face floated along the dark cornices and blinding signs, and so I drew up the girl beside me, tightening my arm. Her wan, scornful mouth smiled, and so I drew her up again, closer, this time, to my face. Oh.
That was quick.
Yep. I guess for the 1920s. I can't tell if Nick thinks positive things about Jordan. I feel like he's constantly like describing her in like bad ways.
So I think that this is when you're talking about she's tan and everything. So he is going against his instincts, right? Like he is infatuated with her.
Yes.
But there's actually nothing to be infatuated with except the way she looks.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I think that that's what's going on with all of
that. Makes sense.
And that's why she's described that way.
And his last line, right, where he's basically like, I had no disembodied face floating along the dark, and so since I didn't have anyone I was like infatuated with, I grabbed the closest thing to me, which was Jordan Baker. Mm-hmm. Right? So yeah, very much so.
And then you can see tan body, golden body, beautiful, but then her eyes are gray.
Yep. Her soul is
the
dead.
Windows to her soul, right?
Solid. So. All right, chapter 4 is done.